Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague, Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about a new proposed rule from the Federal Trade Commission involving non-complete clauses. We had talked about this, I think, a couple months ago. I think it was, Russell, that the president had actually instructed, there's some talk about wanting there to be a ban on non-competes and had actually instructed the Federal Trade Commission to explore this. There's now a proposed rule that is pretty voluminous and has a lot of pretty high burden, I'd say, for employers if it was passed. So what's the status and what should employers be thinking about?
Yeah, so not any specific action items quite yet for employers. So the FTC is a federal agency. Obviously, it's the executive branch. So as we talked about, President Biden instructing them to come up with a rule like this. They have. That rule's now been published. And the rule basically says, and this is a proposed rule, so nothing's in place yet. The rule basically says that all non-competes are going to be declared invalid, including existing non-competes. So it's ostensibly going to outlaw non-competes throughout the country. The interesting thing is, to me, is the questions around whether the FTC has the authority to do so. The FTC has certain rulemaking authority with respect to preventing unfair competition. But there are lots of questions about whether this would fall under unfair competition. The proposed rule goes to some length to explain why they believe that non-competes lead to unfair competition. But that's that's likely going to be litigated at some point. And there's also a whole bunch of questions. We are probably not the world's foremost experts on the separation of powers between the executive and the legislative branch. Although, basic constitutional laws, the legislative branch makes the law and the executive branch enforces it, but there's a lot of gray area there. So they're assuming some version of this it's in the comments section now. People are submitting comments. The rule can be revised, be reworked before it gets finalized. But assuming something like that happens, there will almost certainly be litigation around whether it's enforceable or not. And this is a pretty aggressive reach from the FTC.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that enough businesses make ample use of that we don't expect that it's just going to be implemented, no problems, everyone's just going to accept it. And some of the interesting pieces around it, other than just banning non-competes, is, some parts of the rules also proposed rule also talk about having to reach out to employees that companies have agreements with and letting them know they're no longer in force, and then also banning just even entering into them, not just enforcing them. So that's kind of some interesting deviations from some of the state rules that we've seen that don't necessarily have that hook about, well, if you've got one in place and it's unenforceable, that itself is a violation. So I think it'll be interesting to kind of see whether that proposed rule language changes after the comment period and how much of that sticks around, because a lot of that seems pretty burdensome from where I sit, and given the amount of employers I know that have these in place.
Right. Well, and the other piece too is, at least preliminarily, it looks like non-solicitation provisions will still be permitted, which is something you and I have talked about before. We find them to be more targeted and easier to enforce anyway. So at the very least, it seems like if you're putting something together now, there's at a minimum there's got to be some belt and suspenders and some different attacking what you're trying to protect from a couple different directions to ensure that some or some significant portion of it stays protected, if not all.
I think that this is, consistent what we've been advising clients for a while now, just given the way that things have been with non-competes in courts and with state legislatures, is that you really just have to be thoughtful in your approach, and that still is true at this point. So nothing drastic that we have to do yet for our clients or that employers need to be considering, but still just need to be really mindful of what you're putting in place. And I think that's even more true as this is confirming what we've already been seeing as far as trends are concerned.
Yeah, and like we used to say with COVID, keep an eye on it, pay attention, follow the changes as they evolve, and be ready to adapt to whatever comes our way on this.
Yeah, good advice. Well, thanks, Russell. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.